different directions that we're going to go, different things we're going to learn. And so I'm always excited at the beginning of a semester. So I hope that you along with that journey with us, and that you're ready for some new adventures in music and Latino culture.
Awesome. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't know. So we're gonna go ahead and talk today about some of the different influences for Latino music. So we're gonna touch on indigenous or Native American or Central Mesoamerican influences, and then we're also gonna talk about Southwestern influence, and then also African influence. And so it's going to be a pretty interesting lesson. We always try to include like as much of the culture and stories and narratives as we can as we teach these things. Sorry. And I'll be playing a little bit today because Keith's gonna have to play a lot next week, so we'll switch off. And today I'll be playing a little bit more for you guys, and sharing some of the instruments and stuff like that we're talking about in the presentation. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started then. If you have any questions and stuff like that, just do the little hand raise thing, and we can answer them while we're going along the path of our presentation. All right. So, like I said, we're talking about the indigenous and African influences for Latino music or Chicano music, and people tend to like and I think Professor Sanchez can attest to this too. Is like we tend to like not really notice them because they're so embedded in like the stylings and the rhythms and like the musical culture itself. So we tend to like really kind of forget and not even notice that they're there. Um, and it's kind of an interesting thing, right, Professor?
It is interesting, and I think that it's a surprise when you start to really uncover those layers, uncover the layers, the skins on that onion, and you suddenly realize that all this time I thought I was getting, for example, let me just throw it out there, are the famous song La Bamba by Richie Valens. We hear that song, we're like, okay, we know it's got Mexican origins, it's sung in Spanish. And of course, we hear the rock and roll version that he adapted. But if, as you dig deeper and you go into the regions of Mexico past Oaxaca and way down, you realize that La Bamba comes from Jarocho and from also Huasteco tradition, and you really dig deep, and the actual roots are straight to West Africa. So La Bamba is actually an African song, and La Bamba itself was an African dance. So suddenly you're like, wait, La Bamba, its origins are directly to an African dance. And that's something that all those rock and roll listeners that were new to rock and roll way back in the late 50s, early 60s, they had no idea that there were those types of roots there. And that's what's so fun about this kind of discovery.
Very cool. And like like he says, like it's just like amazing to think that, like these people are like, yeah, this is great, and then they have no idea about the roots of the music, right? So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some of these roots and influences. So first up is like ancient Mesoamerican or like Central American music. And so the music was very it wasn't a thing that was like, oh, it just like, oh, and every now and then, like these guys jam. Like it was like a frequent event, and a lot of it was attached, like we see in a lot of indigenous communities, to ceremony, and so music was and you have to remember this, like the Mexica or the Aztec or even the Maya, they were, and even the Incas were they were a faith-based group, right? So they had an idea of like what the what spirituality was according to them, right? And a lot of times it was like based off these different gods and stuff like that. And so it was polytheistic if you want to like break down the religion and stuff of it, right? But a lot of it was ceremony based, and so practices had to be and rituals needed to be completed in order for certain things to happen. Like we all heard the story about the Mexica or Aztecas, and they would in order for the sun to come up, there needed to be bloodshed. You know what I mean? And so like that didn't mean that they killed people all the time. Did they do that? Yeah, hell yeah, they did. You know what I mean? But a lot of times it was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna kill this little animal or whatever. You know what I mean? That's my sacrifice so the sun comes up. You know what I mean? And there's different groups that did very similar things, like the Maya were very similar in as far as that idea was concerned. But along with those ritualistic practices and traditional practices was also music. And so music was very important to a lot of these groups. And so a lot of times we don't hear about them that much. Like when you hear about Mexica culture or Mayan culture, even Inca culture, a lot of times we hear about like there was cannibalism or like and like human sacrifice, and we hear about those things, and maybe we'll hear about the calendar, but we never really hear about the music. And the music was very cool. Like they do like in a couple weeks, I think actually we might get them. I'm trying to see if it's next week or the week after. We have a musical anthropologist and musician that's going to talk to you named Martin Espino, and he does like what I'm going to do today is like nothing compared to like what that dude does. Like it's just ridiculous. But he'll take you into like more of the story of the instruments. I'm going to play some for you so you can hear what they're like now, so you get like a taste of it. um but it was all about ceremony, and it continues to be. And that's the thing that's amazing about how that music continued to be used over the years, and it's maintained and sustained even past colonization and stuff like that, is that people still practice it, and and it's embedded in our music now, right? So we hear it still today. But music was part of religion, so it was a big deal to them. And so here we see different paintings. These are from codices that were created like pre-contact, and then one of them was created post-contact from the Mexica and the or the Aztec. And so here we have a couple of instruments, like you could see the rattles, right? The yaddles, and then you can see right here. This is a teponatzli. It's a drum, a wooden drum, but it's called a slot drum. And I'm gonna play one for you in a minute, and you can see it here too. And then there's the wheat right here. This is that big, and you may have seen it like when people do danza azteca. They have that big drum, and that's the doom da doom da doo 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 doom da doom da doom da doo 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 doom. That's what they would play that on. Um, and their basic instruments. And these are the drums or the percussion instruments, right? And so we end up keeping to we continue to use these even later, right? Even now we still use them. Like I said, in danza azteca they do that a lot, but we also use them like in other things. Like whenever we start talking about Latin jazz, like when we hear the conga drums and stuff like that, like these are the drums that gave them the idea to start those things. And then also the African drums that are going to come in too, with the people from that were brought over in the cross the Atlantic slave trade. They're going to bring those instruments with them too. And so I'm gonna play some of those in a minute. But I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And one of the things I want to talk about, and Professor Sanchez will add on to that over here, is that with the music being part of the ceremony meant that these instruments also took on the role of beings. Like they were part of it. They were considered like a living thing. And so when you would destroy something like that, it was a horrible thing, right? And so being that these were beings, or like even how would you say it, like tools from the gods, you know what I mean, to be able to like make connections with them, right? For someone to destroy it was like destroying that connection. And the other thing too is like the people that played them, those were like almost like the shamans, right? Like they're the ones that are invoking that connection, and that's something that was really cool too. Um, and so they had these practices, they did these things, they used these instruments and stuff like that to make that connection and have ceremony. here's another photograph of some of these instruments. All right, so they had like a wide range of stuff. So these are the wheats, the ones that I was telling you about, that are like drums, right? There's so teponatzlis. There's even rattles. There's a water drum there. There's even like a turtle shell that was end up being like a percussive instrument as well. And then we have some flutes here. These are all some of the stuff that Martin uses. So you're gonna hear some of them. But I'm gonna show you all a little bit of stuff now. Let me get this out. So I'm gonna play the teponatzli for you. So as you can see it, this one's like there's some that are like gigantic, like big giant ones. I'm poor, so I have this little guy here that does the job, but it's not gigantic like we see some of the other ones, right? And so this one's awesome. Like I love it because like it has some detail to it, right? Some beautiful artwork. This was made by Martin too. So I really enjoy playing this instrument a lot. I'm gonna try to switch my mic over real quick so I can pick it up on my other one. Or here, you know what? Let me just yeah, okay. So I'm gonna play the teponatzli now, and you see how it sounds. The way it's broken up is it's a slit drum. So it's basically like they cut a slit inside of this bamboo, and then here's the sound hole where the sound's gonna come out, right? And each slit, each one of these little pads is where we can create the sound. All right, so we do it by hitting the drum. And it's like different tones for each side.
Professor Noriega, I think we lost you. We lost you for some reason. The sound cut out.
Let me do this real quick. Thanks for telling me. Hold on. Let me switch it on here because that's the only way I'm going to be able to do it. All right. Check, check. Okay. Okay, so now can you hear me again? Okay. Can you hear me? Does it sound good there? Like, can you hear me good there? All right, cool.
It's cutting out. I'm sorry. You know what I'm thinking? I bet you if you just leave your lapel mic on, because that's how I do it with a guitar, you know, you had a little lapel.
I'm going to try it with this. Okay, I'm going to do like what you said. I still kind of sound weird. Hold on. Let me fix that real quick. Check. Okay, there. That sounds a little bit better. So let me see if I can pick myself up with this. I'm gonna lean into it a little bit so we can hear it. All right. And so all it is just hitting those slits. Did you guys hear that better?
No, you still cut out.
Crap, that sucks. Anyways, it's a beautiful sounding instrument. It's really cool. Sorry that you couldn't hear that part.
Is there a sound gate on your computer maybe or
No,
something?
I don't know what's up with it. It's just like not picking it up. But I have other stuff, so don't worry. Like that's only one little thing, so we'll be good to go. All right.
Can I ask you a question,
yeah,
Professor
for sure.
Noriega? So so it sounded like the two, because I've never played one of those. The two sides are tuned to different notes. Is that right? So one is higher, one is lower?
Exactly. So one of them,
Okay.
and you could even see it on the drum itself. So you could see one's like a little bit longer than the other one.
Okay.
And so that's how they make the tones. And
That's
so
cool.
they're the thing that's kind of cool about those instruments too is that they and Martin will talk about this more, is that like we get as people in Western culture, we've like adopted the idea of like not using like detuned notes and stuff like that. And so this one, like, it doesn't matter. It's still, they use like notes that are natural to it, and that's something that's kind of cool too. But yeah, sorry, it didn't sound great, but you know, we'll try with some of the other stuff. And so going along with that, so teponazis are awesome. Like when Martin does it, you'll hear it a lot better. I forgot, I brought my like worse, not great mic with me today. I forgot my other one at the house. And so it's a bummer. But we also have other things too. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these. Maybe you guys have seen these before. These little bird whistles, they're made out of clay, and the Mesoamericans, or the Central Americans, like the Aztecas and the Mexicas, are the ones that created these. And so I'll play one now. This one you should be able to hear. Did you guys hear that? In and out. Okay, my bad.
Just the beginning.
Okay.
I think
It
I
just
think there
doesn't
might
like
be-
it.
I
So
think
let
there
me
might be a sound
let me
gate.
try
It's
let me
weird.
try just using
Yeah.
my I'm gonna try just using my mic on my computer. All right, can you guys hear me now? Okay, cool. Let me go back. All right, so this is the little bird whistle. And so it has a little hole on the top. You can see it there, and you fill it with water, and that's what makes it sound like the way it does. And the more water you put in it, the different sound it makes. But it's a really cool little instrument, and you can buy these different places still now. Your dog's ears went up straight up, yeah, because it's like that high pitch, right? For real. Okay, here's another one too. This is one of my favorites, and some of y'all may have seen this now more on like online and stuff like that. People posting things like this. This is an Aztec death whistle. And so the story goes is that like when the Mexica warriors would go into different villages to take them over, or when they'd go to war with people, or even when a warrior died, they would be given the honor of people blowing this. Well, when the soldiers would go into a new place, they would blow these because it sound like there would be like 1,000 soldiers blowing these. I'm gonna blow it so you could hear it. It sounds like scary as hell, but I can imagine 1,000 of them being blown. Like I'd crap myself probably. Okay, so it has a sound hole on the bottom, and then there's the blowhole on the top. And then it's already scary because it's like a skull, right? So here it goes. That's the Aztec death whistle. Okay.
Ooh, that's scary.
And like there's different tones you can get out of it too if you hold your hand a certain way. But it's also like a really cool instrument. Just like for when my students graduate from high school, my ethnic studies kids, at the graduation, I take this and I blow it all loud when their name comes up, and everyone's like, the first couple, and then after that, everyone's like, oh, okay, that's all good. Now we know what's up with that. Let me see what the chat's saying here. Yep. So recipes, headphone users. Sorry, I should have warned you all. It's loud as hell. Osidious, my bad, bro. I should have warned you. So that's one, two. Another one instrument that we used a lot was gourds, right? And so gourds end up being a way that we make basic rattles. And so this one's like. So all it is just the natural stuff that's inside of it. What they ended up doing later on is they ended up like cutting this middle part off, and they did make a rattle out of this part, and they'd fill it with like corn or rocks. A lot of times they used it because it was also ceremonial. They would add like special rocks. So like obsidian and things like that also ended up being like an important part of it. So like that ended up being an important aspect of the construction of it. What's up, Licia?
So it just reminded me. So my mom and I, we went to we went to Cozumel and Playa de Carmen my senior year for spring break, and we went to Chichen Itza, and I got this there. And so it reminded me of what you were just playing, but it sounds like a jaguar. It doesn't sound like a musical instrument, but it reminded me of that. That's why I said I had something similar. And
Very
it's
cool.
times
Yeah.
at night, when we had our other dog too, there was times where like I would go to my room and I would like blow into it, and they would start like looking all around,
Start
and they're like,
freaking out.
"What is it? What is it?" Yeah.
Yep.
Can we hear it, Alicia?
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
hopefully it
play
doesn't
it.
do the sound bar thing or sound gate thing, but
Okay, watch out, headphone users.
That
I
does
love it.
sound like a jaguar. That's so cool.
just
Yeah,
started barking.
that's awesome. I love that too. You're gonna see another one of those that Martin uses, but his is like, it's long. It almost looks like a teponatzli, and then he blows into it and he's like, and it sounds like a jaguar too. It's a trip, man. So that's that. Those are some of the instruments that we use then, and that were important for the culture during that time, for ceremony and stuff like that. Like I said, there's the conch shells too, right? You blow those and it's like a trumpet, right? And some people can like play it like a trumpet, which is like a trip to me, just by moving their hand inside it out a certain way, and it's just crazy, you know. But talking about that is really cool, because then we get to see some of these things. I'm going to move forward so we can talk a little bit about like some of the other elements as well. And so one of the other things is like I said, the gods were an important factor in the making of music, right? And so I don't know if you guys ever heard the story of how the Aztecs got music. One of the you know, you guys heard of Quetzalcoatl, right? Quetzalcoatl. Well, Quetzal, he wanted to bring music to the earth, and so he stole it from one of the other gods' palaces. He stole his musicians and rode the sunlight back to earth, and brought the music with him. And with that, created other gods, right? And so this god is Wiwi Coyotl, and Wiwi Coyotl or Wewe Coyotl is the god of music. That's the god right there. And so you'd see a lot of people like back in the day, like on your teponatzli, or even on your gourd or whatever, you might have a depiction of that god on it, right? And so that was an important thing too. I'm gonna let Keith take over this part, because he has a really cool story about the next section.
Sorry about that. So what we call post-contact, and I want everyone to get used to that terminology. So post-contact is after the Spaniards and the Portuguese arrived in the Americas. Everything before that was pre-contact. So post-contact, there was an occurrence at the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and it happened in kind of a sort of a strange way. There were actual power struggles amongst different factions of the conquistadores and their garrisons that were arriving from different places, from the islands, and they were coming in, and the King of Spain had actually sent a garrison to arrest Cortés at this time, and this was way back around in 1520. So what ensued is called the massacre of Toxcatl, and it was a massacre, as I said, at the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and sometimes ceremony would last for days, and they would almost take rounds, you know, and they would sleep, but the ceremony would continue. And obviously this was a time of great pain for the Mexica people, because they were little by little being inundated and taken over by an invading power. So the massacre at the Great Temple occurred, and some people call it the Alvarado Massacre. And it happened, and they have the exact date. and this is May 22nd, 1520. So Hernan Cortes, as I said, was in Tenochtitlan at the time, and he heard about the other Spaniards arriving on the coast. And there was another one of the heads of the garrisons, another general, you could call him Panfilo de Navarez, and he had come from Cuba. So what happened was Cortes fled, and he went with some of the Mexica garrisons out into the wooded areas to hide. And so during his absence, Moctezuma asked the deputy governor, Pedro de Alvarado, for permission to celebrate Tozcatl. And this is a Mexica festivity in honor of Tezcatlipoca. And I've trouble saying that one. And this is one of their main gods. And so after the festivities started, Alvarado interrupted the celebration. And there are different accounts of it, but the story is that he felt this power of this ceremony, and that they said he felt faint because it felt like something he had never encountered before. And so out of fear, he feared that moment that he felt that. He sent his garrisons in to attack people in the middle of ceremony. And the most horrid or torrid or horrific part of that occurrence was when the soldiers went in and actually cut off the hands of the drummers. Okay, and as Professor Noriega said, the drum was that direct portal, that direct connection to the sacred and to the gods. So these were sacred moments. This was, this was someone going in and lighting a torch to a church. It would be the equivalent, but in this case, it was worse because the ceremony was just something you don't interrupt, and much less in that violent of a way. So there were a few that managed to escape. There were huge walls, a huge, courtyard around this the great temple of Tenochtitlan, and they managed to get over the walls, and they ran and ran and were able to tell the story of this atrocity. And the last thing I was going to say about this is it shifted the entire stance, because before then the Mexica were still in that place where they were very cautiously accepting some of what of these new people that had come in, and they were cautious, and then that shifted everything. And so what I was going to say about music, Professor Noriega had been talking about how music was more than just a time to jam. It was sacred. But more than that, it also became protest. It also became political, in a sense that after a time when Moctezuma had already died, Cuauhtemoc sent his people, because he knew that the fall of the empire was inevitable, and he sent his people to. They talk about I believe it's the seven corners of the region, and at that time the friars and the monks and the Spanish missionaries, they called it the music of the devil. And it was that same feeling, because it was just such a powerful sound and such a beautiful, joyous ceremony, that it was outlawed. So that's how powerful music was. It was something that was outlawed. They could not play their sacred music. And that's going to take us into other aspects of how they adopted instruments, and they adopted European instruments in order to play the sacred rhythms without the Spaniards knowing. So music was also a form of protest.
Straight up, and it like continues to be right. Like we hear music all the time as a form of protest, but they're the ones that start that shit. Like they're the ones that got that going, you know. And so that's what's
Absolutely.
beautiful about it. And so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next part, and that's more music of the Southwest. So seeing the music of the indigenous cultures a little bit more north, in the regions like here in New Mexico and Arizona and Utah, Colorado, California, all of those places. And so that was also an influence too that we run into, because we use some of these same things in the stuff that we use, that we listen to today even. And it may be a rhythm, it may be using the kind of instrument they used. And so that's something that's also crucial to talk about. And you know, we see this, like, once again, the same thing applies there. Like music was part of ceremony, like we see here with these dudes all dancing, right? And so dance, and that's the other thing too that we kind of like, maybe we need to hit on a little bit more, Professor Sanchez, is like how dance also is connected to it. And so like dance, and like you talk about the Aztecas, danza Azteca, and like even like the traditional dances we see today with indigenous people from the Southwest, those dances are ceremony that is based off of not only the body movement, but also the rhythms of the music that they're playing, right, or the instruments. And so they even take up where they're part of the movement, but they're also part of the instrument, like these guys with their rattles, right? And those are turtle rattles or tortoise rattles. So we see those here, and a lot of people, we've seen these drums, right, like the buffalo skin drums. Like sometimes we see people using those now. And then we have the tortoise rattles and the turtle rattles. And then there's other instrumentation too. But you have to remember, like it was like just like it was with the Mexica and the Mayans, it was part of ceremony. And a lot of times, like there's even like discussion about how these different groups interacted with each other and shared their knowledge of music too. So like rattles that we find in Chaco Canyon were rattles that were used in Mexica culture too. And so there was this disconnect. Zuni Pueblo is really good about talking about that. Like one of my good friends, Edward Wimatewa, he's real good about explaining, like, those were our brothers and sisters that were just south of us, you know what I mean? So we shared a lot, and including music and art and stuff like that. And so that's why we see a lot of similarities in that. And so
well, and even in the, you know, the ruins in Chaco,
oh yeah,
you know, they've uncovered, you know, feathers of the macaw, the big giant red feathers from the jungles of Central America,
and
from the Maya.
And chocolate beans, right? Cacao.
And chocolate beans, yes, cacao.
From there. Yes. So they were interacting with each other. So there's like a lot of misconceptions about that. So like music was huge there too. And so I'm gonna show you a couple of other things too, real quick, before we move on. But like this is a traditional drum. This was made by a friend of mine from Santo Domingo. And so this was and it's a little drum. That's what I like about it. Like when my kids were small, they were like, and nothing ever happened to it, you know. But this is a traditional drum for some of the indigenous peoples around, especially the Pueblo people, right? So it's a cool instrument. And like this was nice because they were like, oh, yo, I'm just gonna carry this around with me because it's all small, right? Not like the wheats that we used in Mesoamerica that were much bigger, but they're made the same way. It's just a barrel or a tree, right? Hollowed out, and then they put a skin over it. Like you look at the wewets, and they're the same. It's the same thing. It's wooden, a tree trunk that they hollowed out, and then they put skins on it. Another one I want to talk about too, and I'm going to go to the next slide so we can kind of discuss it a little bit further, is we ended up seeing the flute being an important instrument. And you saw some of them in the Mesoamerican section I showed you a few minutes ago, where flutes were a very important part of the culture too. So once again, that same connection using music, but then introducing melodies and stuff like that, right? So it's not just about percussion anymore and just rhythm, but now we've included melodies and stuff like that, to where people can create these beautiful songs, and even like orchestras, if you will. You know what I mean? Like, I picture like a bunch of flute players back in the day getting together, jamming with some people on the drums, and just having a beautiful ceremony. And so we know about Coco Pally, right? Everybody, if you're from New Mexico, you have to know who Coco Pally is, right? So Coco Pally was an important figure for the Hopi. There it is. Look, there he is on Professor Sanchez's arm. So he's part of us. He's part of our culture, right? And so these are petroglyph art from a long time ago, depicting this character with his flute, right? And so now it's like been commercialized, and like we see it, like we go to like the fair in Old Town, and there's like those like wind chimes with Coco Pally on it and stuff like that. But the thing is that he was a bringer of fertility and positivity to people through the use of his flute, right? And so his magic was music. And so remember we talked about sorcery and stuff, and music being that part, being magic. Like, this is another example of it. Here's a flute. This one's actually my son's flute, and this one was made here too. Just a beautiful thing. It's made of cedar. You can see it has the holes. It's traditional too. It's not made like in a different way, but it's a cool instrument because it's easy to learn, and it's easy to make those connections with. Like for me, when I play the flute, it's like opening up my connection to my ancestors and stuff like that. And so that's why it's important for me. Did you want to jump in there too?
Oh, Professor Noriega, I was gonna say, try, because that gate keeps clicking right at. So I was thinking maybe if you play it off, so that it's
Sure.
not, it triggers. I think there's a way we can work on that for next week.
Yeah, for next time we will, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna play it real softly because I think it's just that I'm being loud as hell. So I'll play it softly, and hopefully that works. Did you guys hear that? All right, dope. Like right now, it's all popping up. Are you playing music? Yes, I am. Thanks for asking me about this now, Zoom. But yeah, for sure. Like the flute ends up being like a really important instrument for the Southwest, and then also for Central and South America. And so individuals like Coco Pally and those spirits end up being an influence for that, but then we end up using it now. Like, I don't know if you guys are one. What I'll do is I'll post it maybe I'll post it this weekend on the playlist too. Is like you don't ever hear about like oh, people don't use flute. Hell yeah, have you heard Steely Dan? Steely Dan uses flute all over the place, and they play the European style flute, but they also play the native style flute too. But if you ever hear the Beat Nuts, watch out now. If you ever want to listen to that song, go listen to it. The main rhythm of the main melody of that song is done with a native style flute, and it's a Boricua flute. So from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and that's where that one comes from. But it's the same style. It's a native style flute. So I'll post that song too. So moving along to talking about African influence, and so African influence ends up being huge. Oh wait, you meant we needed to share a video, didn't we, Professor Sanchez?
What I was gonna do just quickly is I'm gonna show 3 native Puebloan dances, and we're gonna look at the actual rhythms happening there, because what we're gonna start to do in this class is to really discern and pick apart rhythm and try to hear those influences and how they meld together, how they come together. But it's important to kind of hear these origins, because you're going to hear this mixture of the Africanismo with the mestizaje, which is the mixture of the two, and then of course the indigenous rhythms. And there are a few, I mean, there's one of these rhythms that like literally you can hear it, because even like trance music and house and dubstep and the rest of it, there are pulses in there that are ancient indigenous rhythms and ancient African rhythms. And so I just wanted to play, and I think if you're ever at if you go to a feast day, I suggest you go, because they're powerful experiences. You can even feel the rhythm on the ground, because there are so many dancers that it shakes the ground. So that it's an amazing experience. If you've never been to a feast day out on the pueblos, please go. And they usually happen in the fall. Some of them are midsummer. So let me. I just wanted. Do I have screen? Okay. So let me just. Let me do something here real quick. Let me get it. Okay, there it is. And then I'll stop and kind of discuss why I selected them. Oh, and did I do the sound thing, Professor Noriega? I always forget.
It's in the left-hand corner of your, when you click share, it says share audio.
There it is, share sound. Okay. Very cool. Well, but now I lost it. Huh.
I think it's just because you went full screen.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
Okay, so there's that. But now I lost. Now I lost my screen. Oh, how did that happen? Okay, sorry guys, just a second.
So going along with what Professor Sanchez was saying, was like when you go to the feast days, like you get to really to experience that part. Like you said, like it's no joke. Like I've been there before. I'm like in someone's house, like grubbing, and you have to like eat a lot, right? Too.
Mm-hmm.
And like and when you're grubbing, and then you can feel like the ground kind of shaking. You're like, yep, this is it. And it's a beautiful thing. Like Licia says, it's amazing, to just be able to be a part of that. And like if you ever get invited or you ever have an opportunity to do it, please like take advantage of that. It's a great thing to experience.
And and it's interesting, but and back to the pre and post contact. So there were influences that you're going to hear from post contact, because that's when the Spanish brought their music too. But also First Americans, native tribes from the north to the south, were also keeping certain rhythms just as they had in times of the Mexica, when pre-contact and then post-contact, after the massacres that occurred, they were hiding some of that music. So some of it is sacred music that you don't get to hear. And so that's important to think of. And those were actually shared with African peoples, because African peoples were tribal peoples that were brought in bondage. So there was a commonality. So they shared things with the Africanos that they did not share with the Europeans. So here we go. Shoot, I think I did the same thing. I'm almost there. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Sorry, everybody. There it is. Share. Okay. I think I got it this time. right there, you're going to hear on the downbeat, there's a boom, 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 right? And we hear that in dance music, right? Boom. But if we listen, then what happens with the African influence when the so that was woven over the boom, boom, boom. So the two rhythms started to meet. So here's like that slow, right on the downbeat. And this is the deer dance. Okay. So right here, so think of that rhythm. You're going to hear that rhythm at a rave, right? Right? So, and what those are those, you know, the melding of the two. You hear those, the African influence come over, and they tended to be a little more intricate in some senses, but then there are other indigenous rhythms that you will learn about as we go, with the kind of the Mexica dancers that are, wow, they're fast, they're intricate, they're going everywhere, you know. So that's a buffalo dance. So so you're going to hear these stylings and these rhythms, and the more that we kind of explore the musicality itself, the more you're going to hear, and you're going to be able to link them to these sounds that you hear. You can say, okay, whoa, I know where that influence comes from, and I know where that influence comes from. So we're looking at kind of the heart, really, Latino music, really its basic roots, in all its rhythm really is indigenous and Africano, primarily, predominantly. There are the African influences, but that was more in the kind of the instrumental arrangements and the singing.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Sanchez. So yeah, like, and that's one thing that's kind of cool about like what we're talking about is that we get to see like, and I love that you bring that up because like last time we talked about it last semester about like how the different groups work together and shared with each other that they wouldn't share with anybody else, right? And that was a beautiful thing. And we even get like dance is a big part of it too. And so that was something that was a glorious part of those two cultures coming together. And so let me just go back here real quick so we can close things out and finish up with the African influence to continue that conversation. So we saw the influence in, like we said, like the rhythms and things like that. But one thing also, and Professor Sanchez talks a little about that, but like with instrumentation, there wasn't like too much of that because they weren't allowed to bring over their instruments, right? And so some of the instruments end up falling to the wayside for a while. But then after things get a little bit, things change a little bit, they start bringing the instruments back in. And that's me, and one thing too is they like manipulate them based off of like what they had around them, and so that was another kind of cool thing. This is a picture of some a painting of some of these slaves, African slaves that were brought over, and this is actually in Brazil, and so you can see they're playing the drum and stuff like that, and then you see them. That, have you guys heard of capoeira, right? The martial art. And so capoeira was a martial art they hid with dance. And so they use dance as a way to hide their martial art, right? And so that's even kind of a cool thing. The one that's really interesting for me is the cajon. And the cajon has an interesting story. So the cajon was actually brought over from Africa to Peru. So when the African slaves were in Peru, they were wanting to continue to do their practices and their ceremonies and rituals, and using music. Well, they didn't have the same instruments, like I said, so they used what was around them. And since a lot of them working as dock workers and things like that, they got these boxes that were shipping boxes, and they used them to create a drum. And so here we even see like some dudes, and these guys are jamming together, right? And this dude's playing the cajon, or like a cajon is like a drawer, right? And so that was even brought over with and brought up by the African peoples that were displaced here in the Americas. And so this guy's even playing a European instrument that was adapted to the indigenous groups of the area too, and that's in Veracruz. This is a jarana. And so I'm gonna show you guys those when we go over that section 2 on Son Jarocho. And those were both examples of them doing that. But also, we also got different things, other instruments added to the mix too. One of the most simple ones is this one here. So you guys may have remembered those, like from elementary school, the two little wooden rods, right? The claves. And so claves are all over music today. Like we hear them in hip hop, we hear them in, like we said, like electronic music, we hear them in cumbia. These are also some of the other instruments too that end up being brought back. And a lot of it was based off of cumbia, was the ones that really brought a lot of these instruments back to be played. And so there we have a bass drum, we have the maracas, right? The Mary drum, and that the Mary drum is actually like Western African, like it's like a really prominent drum, and we end up seeing it in jazz and stuff like that as one of the congas, right? And so we have the calling drum too. That's like almost like a talking drum, and the gaitas too. But I'm gonna play the claves real quick for you guys before we wrap stuff up, because we want to show a video. But the claves are simple. It's a little tiny little instrument. I'm gonna try to play it soft again. We use our hand to amplify it. I have a video where I'm playing them because you guys are gonna play them too. Like that's your assignment for this week. And you don't have to play claves. You can play like pencils or whatever. But this is what they sound like. And so that's the son clave rhythm. Like that's the rhythm that ends up being birthing all these different styles of rhythms, like cumbia, rumba, cha-cha-cha. All of those rhythms are based off of the son clave. And the son clave came over with the African slaves to the South and Central and North America. And so it's kind of a cool thing. I'm gonna play a video real quick, and it's like 3 minutes, so we should be able to get through it. So give me a second so I switch over. And this one is a cool video because they talk about cumbia, and like a lot of us, like cumbia is such a big part of our lives, especially like being in the region that we're in, right? Like we hear cumbias like at parties, we hear cumbias every day when on Saturdays when we have to clean the house and our mom turns the radio on, right? And we have to hear cumbias, right? But cumbias, like we don't understand. Yeah, 7 a.m. on the dot, wake your ass up. You have to clean now. But cumbia comes from an interesting place, all right? So we're going to talk about that for a minute here.
It live on ABC
and so,
with YouTube
I'm
TV.
playing this.
If you haven't heard.
Okay, so here we go. I'm going to share this with you all.
About HelloFresh, you're missing out. I've been using this meal service for years now, and it's made my life so.
If you go to a Shakira concert, you may see her do this. It's this part of her show where the drummers start soloing and she's kind of freestyle dancing. And during this section, she's dancing to a variation of the exact same beat. In its most basic form, it sounds like this. Did you catch that? The music is called cumbia. You can even hear it in electronic dance tracks. And it has its own category in the Latin Grammys. And it all started here, up near the Caribbean coast of Colombia. I traveled to the villages where cumbia comes from. And I learned that this specific place, here along the Magdalena River, was fertile soil from which this music could grow. But cumbia is in fact a blend of several strong musical traditions, mainly African and indigenous, but also European, mixing together to make something new, something totally unique to the time and place from which it came. Listen to this beat. Okay, now just watch what these two drummers are playing. We can also look at this another way. This beat is the backbone of cumbia, and I wanted to find out where it came from. So I flew to the beautiful Caribbean city of Cartagena and drove south to a village that was founded hundreds of years ago.
Bienvenido.
Gracias, amigo.
Palenque, un rincón de África en Colombia.
In the early 1500s, the Spanish came to Colombia as part of their Latin American conquest, and with them they brought more than 100,000 captive Africans. But some of these slaves managed to escape and build their own communities. And that's how this village was formed. This place is the first known settlement of slaves who rebelled and started their own community back in the 17th century. And so because of that, they were able to maintain a great deal of their African culture.
Gracias a los ancestros nuestros que nos dejaron toda esa herramienta diciéndonos a nosotros, síganla conservando. Y en eso estamos.
The residents of this village preserve their history with music, which is based on the rhythms their ancestors brought over from the homeland.
Africa, 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 Africa.
These songs are a living, breathing part of the town's culture and history. And with time, these beats started to spread in the region, influencing different styles of music. Does this sound familiar? This is the beating heart of cumbia, and no matter how many instruments are incorporated or in what country it's played, the beat always stays the same. The drum beat brought over from Africa is the main ingredient of cumbia, but eventually the rhythm started blending with instruments from a totally different musical culture, that of the indigenous people of Colombia. I came to visit the Gaiteros de San Jacinto, a musical group that has been playing cumbia since the 1950s. In 2007, they won a Latin Grammy for their folk album, and they're able to continue by training up new generations who keep these old traditions alive.
Nosotros mismos lo hacemos. Hacemos las gaitas, hacemos los tambores, esto nos lo brinda la naturaleza y con esto trabajamos.
We're in the backyard of one of the drummers who is showing me how they make their own instruments using the same methods their ancestors did, like these maracas.
Y suena la semilla.
And this flute called the gaita, which is a quintessential indigenous instrument. So this is what the cultural fusion at the root of cumbia looks like. You have the gaita, a key element in indigenous music, and then you have the drum section playing rhythms directly influenced by the African village just an hour from here. Together they create this unique cumbia sound. In addition to the African rhythm and the indigenous wind instruments, there's one more ingredient to this fusion, the European influence.
Se le puede decir que el canto es la influencia española.
But cumbia is always evolving, and there's one more European influence that is more recent. It's this instrument that Jason is holding, the accordion. And in fact, it was his grandfather, dubbed the King of Cumbia, who traded his gaita flute for an accordion, thus changing cumbia forever.
A través de un juglar de la época conoció este instrumento, se enamoró de él y es donde nace la influencia de este instrumento europeo.
But once formed in this region, it didn't stay put. In the past century, cumbia has spread throughout all of Latin America, further evolving in the process.
Tecnocumbia. Deja de llorar y piensa que algún día un niño te dará toda una.
Hay tendencias actualmente de mezclas de nuestro ritmo de la cumbia con otros ritmos también, con beats electrónicos, hay DJs que lo están haciendo.
Que me digan poesía al oído por la noche. Me parece que te vi bailando un día, me parece que te vi mi zaramulla.
Así como el ser humano siempre vive en constante evolución, todo lo que conlleva a esas relaciones personales siempre va a estar en constante evolución, tanto la música como el arte, como las artesanías, siempre hay tendencias, pero lo principal es tratar de preservar y multiplicar eso que ya está. Y eso estamos haciendo también nosotros para que haya continuidad en todo esto de la comunidad.
While I was in Colombia, I shot an extra bonus episode for our friends over at
All right, so as you can see, like cumbia has its influences, and then it influences so many other genres of music, and even becoming even like used in hip hop and more modern music, right? So that's something that's really special about it. But learning about how it was a mesh of those influences to come together and then create this beautiful music, right? And then now it's like all over the place. Like we even hear it in like Ed Sheeran songs and stuff now, like pop music, right?
We even hear it in old Led Zeppelin songs, and so people have been adopting this and incorporating it and mixing it with different styles forever. That's what's so beautiful about it.